US President Donald Trump says he's reducing tariffs on Chinese imports from 57 to 47%. His announcement followed his first face-to-face meeting with China's Xi Jinping since returning to office. The leaders met in South Korea for just under 2 hours. President Trump also announced that China had agreed to end its boycott of US soybeans and to keep supplies of critical rare earths flowing.
It was a chance to iron out the kinks.
It's a great pleasure to see you again.
Good to see you again.
After months of a tit-for-tat trade war, US President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping sat down in South Korea with demands on the table. For the US, that was access to rare earth minerals. China wanted reduced tariffs and a pathway to American-made chips. Both got what they wanted.
I thought it was a great meeting. I think it was a very friendly meeting. It was a good meeting for two very large, powerful countries, and that's the way we should get along with them.
The US has agreed to shave China's overall tariff rate by 10% to 47% in response to stricter Chinese measures to stop the flow of fentanyl to the US. In turn, China will pause export controls on rare earth minerals, crucial to the production of cars, planes, smartphones and weapons.
That whole situation, that roadblock is gone now. There's no roadblock at all on rare earth. That will hopefully disappear from our vocabulary for a little while.
While the one-year agreement is a step in the right direction, a more comprehensive trade deal is yet to be struck. Trump said the deal would be signed, quote, pretty soon, while Xi Jinping said the countries should finalise the next steps as soon as possible.
The two agreed to maintain regular communication. President Trump looks forward to visiting China next year and invited President Xi Jinping to the U.S.
Two global powers calling a trade truce for now.
Well, Bonnie Glaser is Managing Director of the Indo-Pacific Programme at the German Marshall Fund, a think tank in Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. So the US and China now have what they're calling a framework agreement covering tariffs, rare earths, agricultural trade, fentanyl and TikTok. Not a bad afternoon's work. Does the tariff tit-for-tattery stop now? Can the rest of the world stop holding our breath?
Well, I think that the deal that's been reached is a modest one. There had been escalatory measures taken by both countries over the past 2 months. And essentially what they've agreed to do is roll back these punitive measures that they took and return to the pre-September status quo ante on trade. Nothing has been signed yet. The negotiators on both sides will probably go back and work out some of the details, but there is some good news. There will be a rollback in the very extensive export licensing procedures that China had announced earlier this month, which was resulting in shortages of rare earth magnets and minerals to companies around the world, certainly in the United States and Germany. But that's a suspension. It's for 1 year. And the U.S. has also rolled back some of its export restrictions and agreed not to put any more Chinese companies on its entities lists. So it sounds like there's some important promises that have been made. Also, on fentanyl, the Chinese will take some actions to counter money laundering related to the fentanyl trade. And so the U.S. in turn reduced the fentanyl-related tariffs by 10%. But there's still about 47% tariffs left on China. And we will have to see if this agreement holds because it isn't signed, sealed, and delivered.
We are in a new world, aren't we? This is an uneasy peace, if that, as you say. The Trump tariffs, even though reduced, they still exist. And now we're in a world of China and these annual reviews of its rare earths policy. So this looks like it's all here to stay.
in addition, a concern that I have is that they're talking about these actions that both sides have taken against each other, but there's no indications that the United States and China plan to tackle the longstanding areas of friction in the bilateral trade relationship. And these, of course, include China's extensive use of state subsidies, restrictions on foreign companies' access to key sectors of the Chinese market, and cyber-enabled theft of trade secrets. I hope that once they get beyond the freezes and the rollbacks, that there's actually negotiations about some of these really longstanding problems that really, I believe, need to be addressed. And President Trump has said he wants to have a level playing field in the U.S.-China relationship.
Those of us who aren't experts in this field will look at the sort of stuff that's been agreed. And as you say, this takes us back to the status quo ante. But we have the agricultural element of this framework covering US soybeans and other farm products, which were part of a previous deal between China and the US, as with fentanyl, which was part of a previous deal between China and the US. Why is the White House any more confident now that China will live up to its obligations under this framework than under previous actually signed deals?
Well, the previous signed deal that I think you're referring to is the Phase 1 trade deal, which was from the first Trump administration. And of course, China had pledged to buy large quantities of U.S. agricultural goods and other products. The Chinese bought almost 60%, I think, of what they had pledged and claimed at the time that it was because of the COVID-19 pandemic that they did not buy the rest of them. There is a possibility that the United States might actually investigate what happened with that deal and take actions against China going forward if they feel the need to. In other words, it's one of those cards in Trump's pocket. He has his own sources of leverage, and the Chinese, of course, have their sources of leverage. And just before the two presidents met in South Korea, the Trump administration had said that they were going to investigate that Phase 1 agreement. Now they probably won't. They'll set it aside. We'll see if the Chinese proceed with purchasing what they have promised to purchase, soybeans over the next 3 years, as well as oil and gas in Alaska.
There were some interesting omissions from this framework. Despite expectations, Taiwan doesn't appear to have been discussed. How are Taiwan and indeed other Asian countries viewing the outcome of these talks?
Well, I am certain that Taiwan is very relieved that there was no conversation between the two leaders about Taiwan and its future. And frankly, I'm a bit surprised because Chinese leaders always raise Taiwan when they talk to their U.S. counterparts. But of course, Trump has said that he will be visiting Beijing in April next year. This meeting that just took place was only 90 minutes, and there will be time for longer conversations next year. I don't rule out that there will be some conversations about Taiwan at that time. But Trump, I think, does not really want to talk about Taiwan. He didn't want to talk about it in these talks. He may not even want to talk about it next year because he wants to get wins. He wants things that are good for the United States. Taiwan is a risky issue for him. It can cause problems domestically because there's so much support for Taiwan in the U.S. Congress.
I'd like to take a look at the body language. I don't know how much of the news footage you've been seeing, but I found it really intriguing watching Trump and Xi on the world stage. So we're seeing now pictures of Trump and Xi on stage together. And what I'm seeing is an American president who looks like he's actually pleased to be standing with a man whom he respects, which is not the impression you get when he meets European leaders or indeed anyone else who's not Vladimir Putin. What do you make of that?
Well, indeed, Trump has used a great deal of flattering language to describe Xi Jinping, has said that they are very good friends and that the U.S.-China relationship is going to be great. I think that this is his way of trying to influence the talks. He thinks that it's a good thing to flatter Xi Jinping. But I think ultimately Xi Jinping looks beyond the body language and the words and is really focused on the substance. And it's my view that China has played President Trump really quite well. What they did was escalate to de-escalate. They threatened to apply something like our foreign direct product rule to their critical minerals, essentially saying if there is anybody, any company anywhere in the world that is producing anything that uses China's rare earth magnets, minerals, or any of its critical minerals, and its equipment, that it can't be exported without Chinese permission. And that really did force the U.S., I think, on its back foot. And so I think the Chinese are quite confident at this juncture that they can manage the relationship with Trump. They know that they have really, really powerful leverage in the area of rare earths and critical minerals, where if you look at not just mining, but also the reprocessing and refining, which some of these minerals, China reprocesses and refines close to 100%, they have the United States and other countries over a barrel.
So let's just end on that notion of where we are in this relationship. There is talk of another meeting, but do you think this meeting was a real moment for the US-China relationship, or just a pause in tensions?
Well, I view it mostly as a pause. I don't think it will change anything fundamentally in the US-China relationship. The two countries are engaged in very intense competition. They both want to dominate the technologies of the future. They both want to be the country that shapes the international order going forward and infuse their own norms and practices into the international order. I think China will continue to work closely with Russia in ways that are problematic for the United States and other Western countries. The fundamentals really have not changed, but we have reached a modest truce, and we will see how long that truce will hold.
Thank you for guiding us through that so clearly. Bonnie Glaser from the German Marshall Fund. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at this with our Washington correspondent, Janelle Dumalaon. Welcome, Janelle. So the president seemed very confident that this framework would lead to a successful trade deal.
Yeah, confident is right. We saw many Trump-style superlatives. He called the meeting with Xi amazing. He said that he would give it a 12 out of 10 rating. And, we did see that the two leaders were able to successfully de-escalate and get some of their key priorities addressed, whether it's the U.S. Regaining access to rare earths or China seeing some of their tariffs lowered, as well as some other key objectives. But, of course, many are making this point. I will make it again as well. What we're really looking at here is more of a ceasefire rather than the kind of end to a trade war with a trade deal that would redefine the U.S.-China trading relationship going forward. This is a very, very complicated relationship. There are many thorny issues at the heart of U.S.-China tensions. We are talking about the two countries that are the biggest economic, technological, and ideological competitors in the world. And it really does seem that some of those thorny issues, they really did leave to a later time to discuss. And a lot of what we're seeing after these talks is a return to the status quo. It's worth pointing out the tariffs on Chinese products still remain very high. The U.S. retains some of its export controls on some of its most high-end chips. And we do know that there is still very much the possibility of miscalculations and misunderstandings, setting off yet another cycle of escalation, just because we know that the Trump administration is known to be unpredictable.
Right, but when he gets home, when he lands in Washington, it's going to be day 30 of the government shutdown. So how has his gallivanting around Asia been seen there?
Yeah, so this is a very complicated backdrop. There is that shutdown ongoing, and ahead of the trip, he very much was criticized by the Democrats for leaving the country during a shutdown. But to President Trump, he's very much framed this shutdown as a Democrat shutdown. He really hasn't acted in a way that would suggest that ending the shutdown really is his top of mind priority. But yeah, ahead of the trip, there were several groups, some of them affected by the shutdown, who were looking very anxiously at this meeting between himself and Xi, among them farmers. Now, farmers were, of course, supposed to get a bailout, but the shutdown complicated things. And now that the meeting between Xi and Trump has happened, they have expressed some degree of relief. So the American Soybeans Association released a statement saying it was great news and it was a meaningful step forward, to reestablishing a stable long-term trading relationship that delivers results for farm families and future generations. But Phil, I think we can read between the lines there. This is a welcome step, meaning it is a step. And what they're really looking for is something more lasting and durable, especially given the difficult economic conditions they face.
Thank you for that, Janelle. Janelle Dumalaon in Washington.
Let's talk about this with William Yang, Crisis Group's senior analyst for Northeast Asia, who focuses on China's foreign policy. Welcome, William. We're hearing President Trump sounding very enthusiastic about his meeting with President Xi. Can this really be seen as a trade deal, though?
I don't think so. If we really look at the details from the readout and also the statements that Trump had made before boarding his flight back to the U.S., it's very clear that most of the agreements that they reached today is merely walking back to the level of the tariffs and also lifting some of the tit-for-tat measures that were introduced after the tariff that Donald Trump introduced and unveiled on April 2nd, the Liberation Day. So I think, if anything, this is basically the two sides walking back to where things was before the April escalation. And now I think there are still a lot of uncertainties about how the exact details of each of these agreements will be implemented and whether both sides can actually hold up their ends to make sure that this so-called one-year truce can actually hold up.
Right, let's look at what China has promised. It's apparently promising Trump that it will do a variety of things, including lifting restrictions on exporting rare earths. What is China getting in return for these promises that it's made?
So for the Chinese side, the immediate result that they got was the reduction of the tariff rate. But for a lot of the economists, they were saying that the 20% reduction basically is not really going to do much difference to dramatically improve the trade relationship. And I think for the Chinese side, they still hold the ability and the leverage to be able to tighten the export control of the rare earth at any moment if they felt like the United States is not honoring the so-called concessions that they are making. And I think probably one of the more optimistic development for Beijing is the fact that Trump had hinted that the semiconductor chip giant NVIDIA will be allowed to start renegotiating with China again. But of course, I think the US government is likely going to have the final say with regard to the type of chips that NVIDIA will be able to sell to the Chinese market. So in a way, the Washington also has somewhat of a control over a very important weapon in their eyes to use against China if they felt like the relationship is not going in the right direction again.
So whatever it was that's been achieved here, whether trade deal or not, who was it? Who made more concessions in the end? Who's the winner here, would you say?
I would say that there's no clear winner or loser from this particular round of the talks. I think it's really just for both leaders to reestablish that personal connection and at the same time addressing some of the pressing issues that both sides are facing. And I think they will both be very mindful of the possibility of the heat being turned up again if any of the implementation process falls through. So I think for now, Trump probably feels relief somewhat with regard to some of the domestic pressure that he has been facing because of China's refusal to buy and import the U.S. soybeans and also the rare earth mineral export controls impact on some of the key industries for the United States. But at the same time, I think both sides will remain very wary, closely tracking if the other side has unilaterally deviated from the path that they have laid out from this meeting.
William Yang, thanks so much for speaking to us. That's Crisis Group's Senior Analyst for Northeast Asia.
Thank you.